Good morning, everyone. How's everybody doing this morning? Early day. So my name is Adrian Valdivia. I am the manager of National Progress and Make Stop Rape Organization, but I'm also an activist in Washington, D.C. around African heritage and Latin American issues. I used to have a group called Grupo Afro-Descendiente in Washington, D.C. That used to work with communities and try to advocate for communities of color, specifically African heritage communities in the district. Awesome. So I want you to find somebody in the room that you didn't come with, okay? That you might not know, okay? And I want you to introduce yourself, and I want you to talk about the first time you realized you had an identity and you had some kind of heritage and some kind of race or ethnicity background. How was that experience? Go ahead. Thank you so much for sharing with each other. I'm actually from Venezuela, born and raised in Venezuela. And as a young Venezuelan, my parents, as you were talking about, I'm a mixed bag in a sense. My grandfather is from Barbados. My grandmother is from the Amazon region of Venezuela, Bolivar State. So indigenous and has some other Caribbean heritage too as well. My dad is from Colombia, from the Guajiro region of Colombia. So as far as Caribbeans and South Americans, a lot of times we're very much of a mixed bag in a sense. So today we're going to talk about a lot of times our races and identity, and the opportunity to talk about your own identity and your ethnicity sometimes is important because it's important to highlight those places where sometimes these things get silenced or become invisible. And this is one of the things that has happened to African heritage Latinos or African heritage Spanish-speaking people in Latin America and in the United States and so on. So for further ado, I'm going to present Gabriela Watson, and she's going to have a little bit of history for you and a little bit of her project that she's going to be doing. Everybody.
Good morning, my name is Gabriela Watson. I am actually from Brazil and Peru, and I'm a filmmaker and activist. I'm so happy to be here today. Let's start with the colonization historical period. How many percentage, in terms of percentage, African slaves came to the U.S. and came to South America? Came to the U.S. You guys have an idea? 25? 30% in the U.S.? Okay, 30% in the U.S., 70% South America and Caribbean. Anyone else? All right, so during the slave trade period, only 3.5 came to the U.S. It means that the rest of the percentage went to Caribbean and South America. So I'm going to show a clip of the documentary that I did in 2012 that portrays the works of NGOs to promote equality in Peru.
Mucha gente cree que en Perú solamente hay cultura andina, está Machu Picchu, está la cultura inca, pero no se imagina que hay una cultura afro presente.
América Latina. Nací cerca de Cusco. Me inspira el ron de las Antillas. Canto con voz argentina. Creo en Santa Rosa de Lima y en los orichás de Bahía. Yo no coloreé mi continente, ni pinté verde a Brasil, amarillo Perú, roja Bolivia. Sumerjo mano y mano, y así me aferro a nuestro continente en un abrazo latinoamericano.
Siempre estuvo supeditados a vivir en las zonas marginales de la ciudad. En el caso de Lima, capital, la población negra se remolinó generalmente siempre en la periferia. Entonces, pero eso ha sido a través del tiempo. Y lo que más, que jamás ningún Estado se preocupó o lo tuvo en su agenda a la población africana.
En la comunidad de Yapatera, cuando yo estaba enseñando el curso de fotografía, y me dijo, yo quiero ser actriz. Y después solita dice, mejor no, porque si no voy a ser la Natacha, o la sirvienta, como le llamamos acá, la empleada del hogar. ¿No? Entonces, un poco, eso es lo que refleja la televisión para ellos.
Largamente, no hay otra ruta para cambiar nuestras condiciones de vida que no sea educándonos, ¿no? Y no estoy hablando desde la perspectiva de la educación occidental, dogmática, lineal y bancaria, sino estoy hablando desde la perspectiva del desarrollo de la construcción de nuestra identidad.
With this, the really purpose of these videos is start conversations, start dialogue, start debating about identity, all these topics that we were talking about, just to understand. So I went to Peru because my parents are from Peru, and I wanted to understand more about myself. Because in Brazil, we don't even know about Afro-Peruvians, because I really feel like this is a channel television. I want to tell the media that I don't see in television. So I will encourage you to research about your identity and use that, your unique perspective in your work, in the way that you write your articles, in the way that you do a video, in the way that you talk about different topics. Bring your heritage and bring your perspective to that, and that's going to be very unique. And the other excerpt is it's a compilation, but it's going to be published separately. So each story, it's going to be published online.
Você se acha bonita? Sim. Sim. Você me acha bonita? Sim. Quando você era pequena, você se achava bonita? Não. Eu também não.
Eu queria ser invisível, queria que ninguém me visse. E aí isso durou até os 21 anos. Quando eu comecei a encontrar a galera do movimento feminista, as meninas no cursinho popular falando, não, você tem que olhar pra você. Você tem que se enxergar, você não tem que ser o outro. Como as outras pessoas falavam, que eu tinha que ser sempre a outra pessoa, procurar ser igual aos brancos. Não, tem que ser a Mirella é preta, a Mirella tem cabelo crespo, ela tem que ser como ela é.
E aí eu comecei a ver a história de Dandara, a história de Zezé Mota, a história de Ruth Souza e todas as outras negras que, assim como nós, começaram a lutar.
All right. So it tells a lot about what it means to be Afro-descendant, right? It tells a lot about the similarities and the bonds that we all have. So like we were talking about in the panel, we have many issues, unfortunately. We have colorism, assimilation, racism, segregation. We have the media portraying with stereotypical visions. I think so. This is a good perspective for you to see the problems that you all probably already know of race in Latin America today, right? And one thing that's really interesting to say is that in Brazil or in Peru, and you probably know, in other countries of Latin America, we don't consider ourselves Afro-Latinos, right? Afro-Latino is a really new term. we consider ourselves Afro-Brazilian or Afro-Peruvian or Black. But then when you come to the United States, what happens? Black here is more considered African Americans, right? And then you have this new discussion, or what is to be Afro-Latino, right? And Adrian will talk about this process of how do you transport the identity discussion to the United States, and how these issues are translated in the US society.
So when I came to the United States, later on in college, I graduated University of North Carolina, and then I moved to Washington, D.C. I met one of my mentors, Roland Roebuck, who was an Afro-Puerto Rican man who was doing a lot of activist work in the communities, and actually married to his daughter, Halima Roebuck, by the way. But that's another story. So Roland basically, we created groups, a group called with another friend, Grupo Afrodescendiente, and our job was basically to unite the political sector of Latinos of African heritage. And at that moment in time, we had Garifunas, people from Honduras, who happened to be very strong on their African heritage. And then we also had people from El Chocó in Colombia and Buenaventura. And they were they really identified. And with that group, we decided to start challenging the ideas. We went to Univision. We went to Telemundo. We went to our local newspapers, Spanish-speaking newspapers, and started telling our stories. I started talking about you need to highlight the diversity of Latinos in the United States and in Latin America. And I started telling a story that is not based on the telenovelas that you see on TV, because the telenovelas are pushing at dominant stories about who Latinos are, and they don't look anybody like this or like us. It's an idea of this particular European view of how Latin Americans look. Just like the beauty pageants that you see. They have changed a little bit, but for the most part, they still uphold to that particular dominant story of who Latinos are in a sense. And it's not, so in a sense, through a lot of our activism, and also some of the activism here that he did also for NCLR and so on, we're able to start changing the story a little bit. At some of the local newspapers actually had to hire some people of color or indigenous people or African heritage people, because we understood that the struggle for us was not only find the humanity of African heritage people in the United States that happen to speak Spanish, but it's also of indigenous people that happened to speak Spanish, and everyone else that was mixed that happened to speak Spanish. And that, in a sense, was much more about humanity and bringing everybody's right to get to understanding. So as we did this, we realized that we needed to tell the story again about racism by assimilation versus racism by segregation, and how those things affect our cultures and continuously to affect our cultures. And as I said, racism by assimilation is the things that sometimes we tell to our family. I have family members that I love and I care about who are you can consider white, and they have the racism, but you still love them for who they are, in a sense. Versus a lot of times how segregation has impacted this country, where people are separated and there's no communication. And so, in a sense, as African heritage Latinos, we were able, or we had to go into the gap and say, listen, in a sense, these are people that we care about, that we love, regardless of their lighter skin. There has to be a conversation, because in a sense, that's a conversation we had when we were growing up all the time, America and Latin America. So the question now is, how do we as a people of all colors start highlighting those stories and start talking about them and start sort of, asking our friends and our family about our identities, who we are, in a sense, and start those conversations and start sort of removing the walls of racism and oppression that they're not only part of the systems, but it's also part of our lives, because they get internalized there by those dominant stories. Okay? So thank you so much. So we'll open to questions.